And I see you have some testifiers.
I do, Mr.
Looks
Chair.
like Representative Lippert. Let's see here. Would you like to move your bill, Representative Lippert?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move that House File 1569 be referred to Ways and Means.
Very good. Please introduce your bill and tell us a little about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Working Lands is a continuation of an investment made back in 2016 that allowed the Board of Water and Soil Resources to assess the environmental benefits and market potential of many perennial and winter annual crops. Survey farmers in 6 major watersheds as to their familiarity with and interest in planting these crops on their less productive lands, model the impacts of land use changes on water quality, and assess the amount of subsidies needed to make these crops competitive with conventional row crops, which reduces risk for farmers who volunteer to change their crop mix. Bowser's work was broadly supported within the agricultural community, including the Farmers Union and the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. There's broad support for continued investment in working lands as well, including landowners who want options for keeping ecologically sensitive lands in production, communities who are struggling to provide clean, safe drinking water for the residents, and agriculture leaders who are looking at ways to diversify food and bio-based products to meet changing consumer demands. So in 2016, the Minnesota legislature appropriated funds and directed the Board of Water and Soil Resources to, quote, prepare and plan a feasibility study for working lands watershed restoration program to incentivize the establishment and maintenance of perennial and cover crops, unquote. The intent of this legislation was to assess the feasibility of cultivating perennials and cover crops, primarily for biofuel and bioenergy development. Dave Wayans from Bowser is here, and we'll talk more about that report in a minute. House File 1569 provides $8.5 million in general fund support to Bowser to establish the pilot phase of the Working Lands Wellhead Protection Program. It accelerates the development of self-sustaining markets for conservation crops that improve soil health, reduce runoff pollution, and enhance farm prosperity in community wellhead protection areas. And it does this by establishing screening criteria for pilot areas and landowners willing to participate, outreach to farm operators, agribusiness partners, local governments, and interest groups on the economic and environmental benefits of conservation crops, selection of pilot areas within the wellhead protection areas, providing agronomic and technical assistance for new growers from experts at the University of Minnesota Forever Green Initiative and University of Minnesota Extension programs, establishing long-term contracts for growers to de-risk participation based on preliminary farmer surveys. Costs could range from $35 an acre to $125 an acre. Evaluation of water quality improvements under the program. Coordination with state agencies, soil and water conservation districts, watershed districts, public water suppliers, local governments, and other interest groups. Coordination with other groundwater and drinking water planning and protection initiatives, and maximizing leverage of federal funds assistance for establishment of conservation crops. So that provides some overview of the legislation, and I'll turn it over now to Mr. Wayans.
Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is David Wyrens. I'm Assistant Director for Programs and Policy with the Board of Water and Soil Resources. And I'm here today to speak a little more in depth on the report that was just referred to. We have to go back at a later time. The committee has interest in going into more depth into the findings of the report. The purpose of this was to lay out how might we try and take a transformation in the rural economy to a more perennial landscape, have more cover crops, have more vegetation on the ground more often. Obviously, from our perspective at the Board of Water and Soil Resources, our interest is in the water quality benefits of this. As an agency, we are involved in a wide range of voluntary conservation activities. We have some involvement with a few regulatory programs as well that have water quality as a purpose. But this market-based approach is a third way to try and achieve our water quality benefits, to work with producers to grow crops, have more cover on the land for a longer period of time during the course of a year, so that the runoff as well as the water that seeps into our groundwater have a chance to get filtered by the vegetation before it gets to another body of water. In terms of a little more detail, again, not in duplicating the prior description, part of the work we did is looked at a wide range of potential crops that are either perennial or are cover crops. Some of those you've heard about: Kernza, alfalfa, winter camelina are a few examples of the sort of crops that we analyzed to take a look at. We did a broad survey of farmers in 6 watersheds to get information on what's their level of knowledge, what's their level of interest, what might it take to get them to convert their cropping system from a traditional row crop to incorporating cover crops or changing to a perennial system. And we also looked at modeling. What's the benefit? Again, our interest is primarily what's the environmental benefit. And we worked with the Pollution Control Agency to do modeling of some of these watersheds to identify what would be the water quality benefit, and we're talking about surface water benefits of various scenarios of conversion of row crop land to these perennial crops or to the cover crops. And we also worked in depth with the University of Minnesota. We contracted with the Water Resources Center and some of their economists to help us analyze, looking at current cost of production, looking at current prices of various commodities. What would it take to convert over to a new cropping system? One of the key challenges we had is how do you estimate what is the value of Kernza? What's the value of alfalfa on a broader scale, for some examples? Because the idea there is we want to provide, we have to acknowledge that there is an economic component here. A farmer, if they're going to make a change, they have to have some idea that they're going to earn income off that land as they do currently. So how do we cover for that? And that gets back to the issue of what kind of subsidy might be required to make that conversion if you're a farmer. And those are, again, more details in the report that goes through this in some more detail. In terms of the recommendations of what would come next, the recommendations that we had provided for is we think there are some elements of a future working lands program that we think should be considered, and they're outlined again in more detail in the report. We think the first one is speaking about flexibility. Producers need to have some flexibility of determining what kind of crops they might want to plant, and they of course are going to look at what's their return, how they're going to make some income on that, and how does that interplay with state and federal programs as well. We think there also should be a simple enrollment process. One thing we heard pretty loud and clear in the survey is make the process, everything as simple as possible. More complicated is going to be a turnoff. That's no surprise to you members as you talk to your landowners out there as well. The issue of risk management is a real critical thing. There is a cost of lost production. I mean, the current corn soybean price versus some other perennial, but there's also the opportunity cost of making the change. We have to acknowledge that in whatever subsidy we're going to offer, and that needs to be provided in here. We think we need to have a conversation with the federal government about crop insurance. That's a really big deal if you talk to farmers, and we need to make sure that we are accounting for that in a future program. We also think that a way to get some immediate benefits is to really have more of a source water focus. We think there's a smaller landscape that this can be applied on, and there are ways to make some more immediate benefits to water suppliers. And a key part and part of the involvement in this work with the University of Minnesota and Forever Green is the need that needs to be more work on supply chain and infrastructure. There's a very well developed for corn, soybeans, sugar beets and the like. We need to create a similar kind of infrastructure to support farmers, provide a market for what they produce as well. And I think the last thing I'll say about this is that we also think that if we're going down this path, we should look at how do we get some multiple benefits. Groundwater quality and surface water quality important. But what else can we do with how we target this to look at pollinator habitat, wildlife habitat, carbon storage, some of these things to provide some multiple benefits of the sort of kind of where we target it, as well as the kind of crops that would be produced under this kind of program. Again, Mr. Chair, this report was completed in February of 2018, and it's available on our website. We're happy to come back and present more detail should there be interest on the part of the committee.
Very good. Thanks for your testimony, and I know we got some questions here, but I'd like to get all the testifiers
Great.
to give their.
Yep. I'll invite Aaron Meyer forward, who's from the Minnesota Rural Water Association. He can speak some to the water quality challenges that some communities face in these wellhead protection areas.
Please be as quick as you can to get your point across, if you would, please. Introduce yourself.
Aaron Meyer, Minnesota Rural Water Association. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to testify. I'll be as short and concise as possible. Basically, I'm here just to talk on behalf of the need out there for drinking water. Minnesota Rural Water Association, we're a nonprofit group. We're located across the state. We have 20 staff members, and we have 1,000 members out there, largely comprised of municipalities, industry, and businesses, and we provide water, wastewater, and wellhead protection assistance to our members. Reason why I'm here today is basically to reemphasize the need out there. I work directly with municipalities, farmers, ranchers across the state in these well protection areas, and we need some more assistance, some more tools out there to help us to alleviate some of the nitrate leaching that's occurring. In your packet, just to kind of give you guys an idea of the breadth of the communities that are dealing with elevated nitrate levels, I think there's a map that was produced by Minnesota Department of Health showing those hotspot areas. And just to try to keep as short as possible is we need to create other opportunities for farmers, ranchers, and public water suppliers to have some kind of perennial cropping system, some kind of living cover that's out there so that we can provide, better groundwater protection in these sandy, coarse textured soils, which traditional row crop right now, even with the best operators, there's some great farmers out there, there's still elevated nitrate levels leaching through their farming practices. And introducing perennials or living cover will help to take care of some of those issues. Then finally, just to echo some of the earlier testaments, is we need to make this economically driven, has to be sustainable, and we have to have some kind of market for that. With that, I'll be short and conclude.
Thank you very much, and we'll bring up the next testifier if we can, please.
Yeah, Dr. Gabe Guzmini is here. And he's from PepsiCo, and he's going to talk about the role that these crops can play in creating new markets and meeting changing consumer demands as well.
We're going to ask the testifiers to stick around, so if there's questions, we know we have questions, and not sure exactly who for, so just stick around. Please introduce yourself for the.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Gabe Guzmini. I'm the Director of Crop Improvement Research for PepsiCo. As most food companies, we're always interested in new raw materials for our products. And we have three characteristics that we're interested in, among others. One, that they bring a nutritional advantage to the consumer. And the second, that they can improve the environment or protect the environment while they're grown. And third, that they bring profitability to the farmers. And the crops that this initiative is working on checks all the boxes. And so we've been engaged in research in partnership with the university in helping to translate some of the innovation that they developed in the last couple of decades into market opportunities for downstream application. And some of them are more advanced than others, and we're quite excited in being able to eventually continue to partner and bring them to fruition to the consumer.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Finally, I'd invite Doug Brands forward. He's here from the city of Edgerton. He can speak about some of the challenges that Edgerton has faced, and he's also a landowner, so he brings that perspective too.
Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Doug. I am from the city of Edgerton. I am the water supervisor. The city of Edgerton has been involved in wellhead protection since 1997. At that time, we put about 20 acres of land into CRP to protect our well from nitrates. What was happening is, as row crop farming became more competitive, farmers started applying more nitrogen and such like that. And our well is shallow, so it's easily contaminated. It's probably only 42 foot deep, with the water table on a wet year like this summer was as high as 8 feet below the ground. So it's easily contaminated with runoff, with leaching of nitrates. So in 2001, our nitrates were maybe coming down slightly. In 2001, we put an additional piece of CRP, just 10 acres adjacent to our well. Within about 3 years, our nitrate levels have dropped in half. Well, that was a 10-year contract with that landowner. Came to the end of the contract, and CRP didn't pay as well as row crop farming and such. So he asked the city, he said, if I keep it in CRP, will you supplement it? Well, pretty soon the city council, the landowner started to butt heads and didn't think that they couldn't come to an agreement. So the landowner said, fine, I'm done with the city. and he took it out. Well, within about 3 years of that, our nitrate levels have gone back up. So in 2011, it came out. 2014, I started noticing going up. By this time now, well, last year about this time, our nitrate levels have reached the levels that they were back in 1997. So obviously, you can see the importance of wellhead protection by that. Since then, I've worked with the landowner as a city and a city council, and we have gotten that land rented back from him. I can't talk him in at the current time to putting it back into CRP, but I have talked him into renting land to the city. It's a 128-acre piece, so the city has a major investment in this, but we have planted kerns on 40 acres of it. So you can also see the importance of marketing the kerns and the sustainability of it. The other 90 acres we put into cereal rye, and which is basically planted in the fall, harvested in the fall, but there are no longer no row crops in there. And since then, I have slightly noticed my nitrates coming down. Not significantly yet, but I'm hoping to see within about 2 years that they come back down to the levels they were before. They asked me to speak as a farmer's perspective. To call me a farmer would be kind of an exaggeration. I'm more of a hobby farmer. I have a little bit of land. But alternative things like kernza and alfalfa has been around our area for quite a while, is important. There's a lot of farmers that can use the hay for grazing. In my wellhead protection area alone, there are for sure 3 cattle farmers that need feed for their cattle. So alternatives to the corn that they're planting would be very important. With that, that's all I've got, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your testimony. Any other testifiers, Representative Lippert, that you, I'm going to ask for the audience here,
Yeah,
but,
that's my group.
okay. Anybody in the audience want to testify on this bill? Seeing none, I'm going to go to member questions. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Representative Lippert and Mr. Chair, I noticed across a number of committees, there's a lot of proposals coming in with general fund impact. And this one specifically, because of the time I've spent with LCCMR and now with the Legislative Water Commission and others. And I'll just read from the LCCMR. The ENRTF is intended to provide a long-term stable source of funding for innovative and far-sighted activities to protect, conserve, and enhance the state's air, water, land, fish, so on and so forth. Is there been an LCCMR proposal? Has there been an attempt to try to fund this in some other way? I mean, right now we're looking at, like I was mentioning, I feel like a little bit of a broken record. We're talking about a lot of general fund monies being asked for to go towards these kinds of projects. And I appreciate the testifiers. I think that they've done a good job bringing up some of the positives in this bill. But at the same time, we're talking about $8.5 million from general fund revenues, and when the LCCMR was created over 30 years ago or thereabouts, that's how it was sold to the people of Minnesota. And then again, also, when we're talking about the legacy amendment, that we're going to be working on clean water with these funds. And I know it's a process, and I know that there's a lot involved to get something like this maybe through that process. But here we are asking the taxpayer to pay more as opposed to making sure that those sources for revenues are considered. And, I just appreciate some response to that concern.
If I may, Representative Heinzman, I don't mind getting a response, but we're going to go too far into the finances and the policy committee, so, but
I believe
please,
Dave Wyron's going
give
to
us your
respond to that.
Mr. Chair and members, in a brief response, the board did make a proposal to LCCMR for doing some of the work that's proposed in the legislation in front of you. It was not funded at that time.
Okay. Thank you for that. Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My initial question was going to be on the same line as Representative Heights, but I had a second question that I believe one of the testifiers, did I hear him correct that their well was at 42 feet depth? And I guess as a follow-up to that, is that well grandfathered in for use as drinking water? Because my understanding is that our certified well drillers are not able to even drill a well less than 50 feet for potable water. That you couldn't construct that well today and meet the Department of Health requirements. So I'm just curious about that because that's a very, very shallow well.
This well was drilled in 1976, and we've gotten, other than the nitrate, we have very good water in there. And to my understanding, in our corner of the state, there are several wells shallower than that. Now, the new rules as far as 50 feet and stuff, I can't speak to that because I don't know the law on that. We haven't drilled a new well in the city of Edgerton since then. And what we are doing, this is our only source of water, so it's been a concern for a long time. We are connecting to Lincoln Pipestone Rural Water to have a second source of water, and that's also a financial burden on the city is to the tune of $1.2 million, and that's Lewis and Clark water that's going to be coming.
Thank you. I just, because it really struck me, because we've got a situation in the world I come from where sometimes we can find very good water at 30 feet, but well drillers can't do that. And then we'll find water that's got too much iron in it at 50 feet, and the next thing we're at 180 feet for a residential well. So there's a huge amount of cost involved there. But I know, at least in north central, northeast Minnesota, obviously that very top level of water is very susceptible to what goes on the surface. But yeah, I was just struck by. It's a good thing they grandfathered that in because you could not construct that well today at that depth.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I appreciate that the bill is looking at a market-driven strategy to try to implement some of these things, and cover crops are a good thing, and we all want to make sure that they help improve water quality. But I find it a little bit ironic that you're talking about alfalfa and forages, things like that, and the guy from Edgerton talked about livestock farmers in the area that would be in the market to use these products off these cover crops. But yet, we're hearing more and more talk, especially from Washington, that cows are bad, they belch too much and give off methane, and some want to do away with livestock. And I just think that there's a realization here that to make something like this work and to make it economically feasible to make a program with cover crops work, livestock can play an important part in that process by being a market for the cover crops produced. And I'd like to hear, and I know this isn't a finance committee, Mr. Chair, but again, the finances have to be a part of making a program like that work. And the fellow from Edgerton, and I love Edgerton, it's the most hallowed basketball town in the state of Minnesota, so congratulations, 1960 state champions. But if you're renting out some of that land, is it coming at all close to cash flowing? Are you able to make it work?
That was our goal, is to try and make it work. And last year we had a poor crop of cereal rye. We had a major snowstorm late in the year, and I think the germination didn't. It was a poor germination, so the stand was thin. The yield was poor. We were able to get some financing through the Minnesota Department of Health to assist it, and through the financing, we were able to break even or come very close. But the numbers that we've put together with the cereal rye, and as long as we're able to sell the kernza, my goal is, or our hope is, that it would be sustainable. That was what our efforts were to try and show. At this point, we've only done this for 1 year, and this is our second crop. Our second crop will be coming next fall. I would have better numbers then, but the first year, no, it was not.
Representative Anderson.
One quick follow-up, thanks, Mr. Chair. Now, the Kearns, I believe, is perennial wheat. You
Yes.
can use that for a 4 or 5 year rotation. How has that worked out, and where is your market for that perennial wheat?
So we seeded it last August, and we got a short growth this fall. Our market is the University of Minnesota is going to buy it back from us and use it for seed to supply other wellhead protections or what they decide to do with it, I'm not sure.
Very good. Representative Fabian.
I would
Well,
just quickly add,
Representative
Representative Anderson, that there are some cafes that are experimenting with Kernza and some brewers that are experimenting with it too. And I believe General Mills is considering some sort of small production facility as well.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what's attempting to be done here. I'd be remiss too, Mr. Chair, I realize this isn't the Finance Committee, but as I read the bill, we're going to spend about $1.7 million per year. And I'm still not exactly clear exactly what we're going to be doing. And Representative Wagenius would say, how are we going to measure outcomes? And we already have a number of programs that do things with regards to planting perennials and so forth, PREP, RIM, our buffer program, CRP. We've got the water quality certification program through the Department of Ag. The University of Minnesota is working on different things. The Magnuson Research Farm up in Roseau, for example, is growing Kernza wheat. Richard Magnuson grows it on his farm. I've been in his combine when he's actually combining it. And they're very much of a struggle to get that to be any kind of a crop that does some cash flowing. But what is this program going to do that a lot of these other programs aren't? And Mr. Irons, I'm wondering, does Bowser have the capacity to do this? How many FTEs you're going to have to hire? There's a lot of questions that I have.
Well, Mr. Chair and Representative Fabian, to respond to your question is the kind of what you're asking is our perspective on this bill. And what I can tell you is that, this is, I'm sure you know, it's not in the governor's budget. But however, we certainly would accept responsibility to pick this up if it were to be enacted into law. If experience were a guide from what we did under the first round of the project, I can speak to what our staff cost was this. We had less than one full FTE that was devoted to this work over the course of the roughly 2 years we did the work. We had one position that was about half-time on this, and then a share of my time was devoted as well. And that was all that we devoted to get this first phase done in terms of our costs. The rest of the money that we received in 2016 went out to various contracts to get the actual work done for the project. And in fact, we sent some back to the general fund as we not spend it all under this initial project.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But what would you have to do additionally with this program compared to what you're doing now? I'm not clear. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair and members of Fabian, we are currently not doing anything in this regard at this point in time. The initial work we did was a feasibility study to look at how such a program could in fact work. As it lays out, we think there are opportunities out there. It also does speak to the fact, to the question of Representative Anderson as well, is that we believe there is going to be a subsidy required. The intention and the discussion of the course of the first project was that it be a temporary. How temporary remains to be seen. You need to develop the infrastructure. Well, first make sure that the various crops are well suited and are productive enough, that there's a market for that so that farmers can sell it. With the goal being is that if we kind of create some, in effect, startup money, how might this turn into a long-running opportunity where there's no longer need for a government subsidy to make it work? That's the goal of this, and that's what we were trying to get at with our initial approach that we laid out in this report from last year.
Thank you. And I just want to add, Representative Fabian, that looking at this algorithm as well, and we do have to figure in on what are we going to get out of it, pollution prevention wise, because it would, Park Rapids, they had to drill a new well, and we paid for part of that, and the community had to pay for part of that. So there's a lot of things go into it. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I respect that. I really do. I think DNR's got in their budget now the Pineland Sands forest study and so forth that they're doing there. I'm not necessarily opposed to what we're doing. I do think that we should take money from Clean Water Fund or from LCCMR instead of the general fund. And with all due respect to Bowser, I'm just not sure that they are set up to start dealing with the economics of agriculture and what's going to work and what's not. I think there would be better sources for that. Thank you.
Representative Baker Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wanted to thank Representative Lippert and the testifiers. I think this looks like a great program. I really like the focus being on water and drinking water, and what I heard from the testifier from Edgerton is that there's an immediate need to address this so that the people in their community have safe drinking water. As far as the demand, if you went to the Land Stewardship Project breakfast yesterday, I believe one of the items on our plate was made with Kernza. And we learned about how those root systems work and how those are beneficial. And I think at one point there's a couple of the local craft breweries who had trouble finding enough Kernza for what they were trying to do. So I know, as it becomes more available, as a brewery, you're not going to invest in starting a new beer if you're not sure you're going to continually have the grains that you need to make that. So I think there probably is an appetite for grains like Kernza. And then finally, I just wanted to say, I'm on the tax committee too, and folks tend to not have any problem with tax breaks for farmers in rural cities. And that impacts the general fund as well. So I really like the focus of this being on drinking water. So again, thank you to the testifiers for their words and for you for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Representative. I would just add that I think there's a broad group of stakeholders here behind this legislation, which I think is very unique and leads to good chances for success. This is a very unique opportunity, and the need is definitely urgent related to water. So I'm very supportive of this legislation and urge it forward.
Can I take those as your closing comments?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Very good. Representative Lippert will renew his motion in House File 1569, be referred to Ways and Means. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The bill is on its way. Thank you.